Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on one of the most infamous figures in Roman history, Commodus.
Yeah, Commodus the Roman emperor, who's often portrayed as like a power-hungry, bloodthirsty tyrant.
Right.
But how much of that is actually based on fact, and how much is just sensationalized history?
That is exactly what we are going to uncover today.
Yeah.
We have some fascinating source material to guide us an interview with Dr. Alex Emery,
Okay.
a Roman history expert from the Ancients podcast.
Excellent.
So as we kind of dig into Commodus's life and reign, we'll see that he's a much more complex figure than the Hollywood villain he's often made out to be.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
Commodus was born into a world of immense power and privilege. He was the son of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor,
Yeah.
and the first Roman emperor to be born to the purple. Now,
Okay.
for those who might not be familiar with that term, it means he was born while his father was already emperor.
Right. So that's a really significant departure from the tradition of adoptive emperors that had characterized the previous century. It was a shift toward a dynastic system, which some historians argue contributed to the instability of the Roman Empire in the years to come.
Makes you wonder, did this change in succession create a sense of entitlement in Commodus? Did it set the stage for the dramatic events that would unfold during his reign?
Yeah, that's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that the sources we have about Commodus, particularly the Historia Augusta,
Right.
are known for their bias and embellishments.
The Historia Augusta is a bit like the ancient Roman equivalent of a tabloid,
Yes.
full of juicy gossip
Yeah.
and scandalous stories.
Absolutely.
It paints a rather unflattering picture of Commodus,
Right.
even from his childhood. But we need to take those accounts with a grain of salt.
Right. Absolutely. We need to be critical of the sources and consider the potential for exaggeration and manipulation.
Yeah.
However, even if we set aside the more outlandish claims, there are interesting details about Commodus's upbringing that offer clues to his later actions.
For instance, despite the negative portrayal in the Historia Augusta, it's clear that Marcus Aurelius actively groomed Commodus for power. He was named Caesar at a young age and even became co-emperor with his father at just 15 years old.
Think about that for a moment.
Wow.
At 15, when most teenagers are preoccupied with school and friends, Commodus was already sharing the leadership of the Roman Empire. He was the youngest consul in Roman history.
That's incredible. It seems Marcus Aurelius had faith in his son's abilities, despite what some historical accounts might suggest.
Right.
So what happened? Where did this image of Commodus as a tyrant come from?
Well, it's a complex story. But one pivotal moment that seems to have shaped his reign was his decision to end the Marcomannic Wars shortly after becoming sole emperor.
These wars, if I recall, have been going on for years, draining the empire's resources and manpower. They were a major burden on Marcus Aurelius during his reign.
Exactly. And while some advisors saw Commodus's decision to end the wars as a sign of weakness, it's important to consider the context. The empire was facing not only external threats, but also internal challenges,
Right.
including the devastating Antonine Plague.
The Antonine Plague. That was a horrific pandemic that ravaged the Roman Empire for years, claiming millions of lives.
Precisely. So Commodus was inheriting an empire weakened by war and disease. Ending the Marcomannic Wars, while perhaps unpopular with some, could have been a pragmatic decision
Right.
aimed at consolidating his power and addressing more pressing issues.
It's fascinating how a single decision can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Yes.
What's seen as weakness by some can also be viewed as a strategic move to secure the empire's stability.
And that's the challenge and the beauty of studying history.
Right.
We need to look beyond the surface and consider the motivations, pressures, and complexities that shape the actions of those who came before us.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious, how did this decision to end the wars affect the dynamics within Commodus's court? Did it create any ripples?
Well, it certainly didn't go unnoticed.
Yeah.
Commodus's actions, or perhaps more accurately his inactions, created a power vacuum that ambitious figures were quick to exploit.
Oh, I can imagine the drama that must have unfolded. So who were the key players in this Game of Thrones Roman style?
There were several, but a few stand out. One was Sauderus, his chamberlain.
Okay.
He held immense influence over Commodus, but was deeply disliked by the senatorial elite.
That sounds like a recipe for conflict.
Yeah,
A powerful figure close to the emperor but resented by those in the traditional seats of power.
it is.
What happened? Did this tension lead to anything?
It most certainly did. In 182 AD, a conspiracy emerged involving senators and even Commodus's own sister, Lucilla.
His own sister.
They plotted to assassinate Commodus and replace him with someone more to their liking.
His own sister involved in a plot against him. That's incredible. What was the outcome of this conspiracy? Did they succeed?
No, the plot was foiled. The consequences were severe for those involved. Lucilla was exiled and later killed. Several senators were executed, and Commodus's brother-in-law was forced to retire from public life.
Wow, that's a brutal response. This conspiracy clearly had a profound impact on Commodus. Did it make him more cautious, more involved in governing?
Well, that's where things take an interesting turn. Instead of taking a firmer grip on power, Commodus seemed to withdraw even further, relying more heavily on a series of advisors who weren't always looking out for the empire's best interests.
So this is where we start to see the seeds of the mad emperor narrative being sown.
Exactly. But before we delve into that, I think it's important to understand the context of Commodus's reign and the pressures he was facing.
All right, let's dive deeper into that next time. We'll pick up the story in part 2 of our Commodus Deep Dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and reign of Commodus. Last time we left off with a failed conspiracy against Commodus and his subsequent retreat from the complexities of ruling.
Yeah, that plot seems to have marked a turning point in his reign. Instead of becoming more engaged in governing, he seemed to withdraw further, relying more heavily on advisors who were often more concerned with their own ambitions and the well-being of the empire.
And this created a power vacuum, right? An opportunity for those ambitious figures to vie for control and influence.
Exactly. And one of the most notable figures to emerge in this context was the Praetorian prefect Perennis. Now, the Praetorian prefect was the commander of the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite bodyguard. So you can imagine the influence this position held.
Oh, absolutely. They were essentially the gatekeepers to the emperor, controlling access and wielding considerable power within the imperial court.
So what was Perennis like? Was he loyal to Commodus or just looking out for himself?
Well, the sources paint him as a rather ambitious and ruthless character. He managed to eliminate rivals and consolidate his control, but his thirst for power ultimately led to his downfall. According to Dr. Emery, an uprising in Britain around 185 AD, coupled with a mutiny among the legions stationed there, gave Perennis's enemies the opportunity they needed to strike. A mutiny? That sounds serious. What did they do?
They cleverly exploited the situation, spreading rumors that Perennis was plotting to overthrow Commodus and install his own son as emperor.
Wow, that's a bold accusation. I mean, accusing the Praetorian prefect of treason is a risky move. Did Commodus believe these rumors?
It seems he did. Whether he genuinely believed them or was simply swayed by the pressure from others is debatable. But the outcome is clear. Perennis was executed, and another figure rose to prominence in his place. Cleander, a freedman who had been subtly whispering suspicions about Perennis in Commodus's ear.
Wait, a freedman? You mean a former slave? That's quite a jump, going from being someone's property to being a powerful figure in the emperor's inner circle. How did Cleander manage that?
Cleander was a shrewd and opportunistic individual. He recognized Commodus's disinterest in the day-to-day running of the empire and exploited it to his advantage. He essentially turned the imperial administration into a marketplace, amassing a fortune by selling offices and favors.
So corruption was rampant. That doesn't sound like a recipe for a stable and prosperous empire. What did Commodus do about this? Surely he must have been aware of what Cleander was up to.
Well, that's the thing about Commodus. He seemed content to let others handle the affairs of state while he pursued his own interests. And those interests, as we'll see, were becoming increasingly unusual.
Okay, so we have this backdrop of political maneuvering and corruption, and Commodus seems to be almost detached from it all. Is this where we start to see the mad emperor persona emerging?
Yes. This is where things start to get really interesting. And to fully understand the context of those actions that have been labeled as madness, we need to talk about the grain shortage of 190 AD.
A grain shortage. How did that contribute to the image of Commodus as a tyrant?
Well, Rome, as you know, was a massive city with a huge population. It depended on a steady supply of grain to feed its people. A shortage could lead to unrest, riots, and even famine. And that's exactly what happened in 190 AD.
So this grain shortage created a crisis for Commodus.
Absolutely. It was a major challenge to his authority and his ability to maintain order. And amidst this crisis, Commodus's actions, or perhaps more accurately, his inactions, were scrutinized and criticized.
So what did he do? Did he take steps to alleviate the shortage and calm the people?
Well, the sources offer conflicting accounts of who is responsible for the shortage and how Commodus responded. Some suggest that Cleander, the freedman we mentioned earlier, engineered the shortage to discredit Commodus and seize power himself. Others claim it was the work of Papirius Dionysius, the prefect of the grain supply, who was a rival of Cleander.
So it was either a deliberate act of sabotage or just incompetence within the administration. Either way, it put Commodus in a difficult position.
Indeed. And it's against this backdrop of political intrigue and social unrest that we begin to see those actions that have contributed to the image of Commodus as a mad emperor.
Okay, so let's talk about those actions. What are the specific things that Commodus did that have been interpreted as signs of madness or tyranny?
Well, there are three key examples that stand out, all stemming from this period of 190 to 192 AD. First, his obsession with Hercules.
Hercules, the Greek demigod, the son of Zeus, known for his strength and heroic deeds. What did Commodus do that connected him to Hercules?
His admiration for Hercules went beyond mere inspiration. He identified with Hercules so strongly that he demanded to be recognized as a god in the same vein as Hercules Romanus.
He wanted to be seen as a god. That's a pretty bold claim. How did he express this desire?
He had statues and coins created depicting himself as Hercules, complete with the lion skin and club. He even pressured the Senate to officially deify him.
Wow, that's quite a departure from the image of his father, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor.
It's
It'll make you wonder about Commodus' state of mind.
It certainly does. And this wasn't just a harmless eccentricity. It was seen by many as a sign of megalomania and a dangerous disregard for the traditional boundaries of power.
Okay, so we have this obsession with Hercules. What was the second sign of Commodus' alleged madness?
His insatiable appetite for gladiatorial games. He staged an almost endless series of these spectacles, forcing senators and other elites to attend.
Gladiatorial combat was incredibly popular in ancient Rome, wasn't it? Many emperors enjoyed the spectacle.
Yes. But Commodus took things a step further. He actually participated in the games himself, fighting as a gladiator in the arena.
He fought as a gladiator, the emperor himself. That's incredible. What was the reaction to this?
The sources, particularly Cassius Dio, paint a vivid picture of these events. Commodus would fight against opponents who were clearly outmatched using blunted weapons, and he would revel in the cheers of the crowd.
I can imagine the senators were less than thrilled to be forced to watch their emperor prance around in the arena. Did this damage his reputation within the elite circle?
Oh, absolutely. They saw it as a complete disgrace, a violation of the dignity of the imperial office. They saw it as further evidence of his instability and his disregard for tradition.
Okay, so we have the Hercules obsession,
Yeah.
the gladiator emperor. What's the third sign of Commodus' alleged madness?
This one is perhaps the most outrageous of all. Commodus reportedly planned to rename the city of Rome to Colonia Commodiana.
He wanted to rename Rome after himself. That's audacious, to say the least. What was the thinking behind this?
While the evidence for this plan is primarily from hostile sources, there are inscriptions that suggest he was serious about associating himself with the city in a very literal way. It's almost as if he wanted to rewrite history to make himself the central figure in the narrative of Rome.
That's a fascinating and, frankly, unsettling thought. It does seem to fit with this pattern of self-aggrandizement and disregard for tradition.
Exactly. For Commodus's critics, this was the final straw. It confirmed their worst fears about his megalomania and his desire to reshape the world in his own image.
So we have these three pretty outlandish actions: the Hercules obsession, the gladiator emperor, and the renaming of Rome. It's easy to see how these actions contributed to the image of Commodus as a mad emperor. But Dr. Emery hinted that there might be a different interpretation of these events, a way of seeing them not as pure insanity, but as something else entirely.
Yes, he did. And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive into Commodus. We'll delve into those alternative interpretations and consider whether there's more to this story than meets the eye.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the life and reign of Commodus the Roman Emperor, who's often portrayed as a power-hungry tyrant obsessed with gladiatorial combat and even renaming Rome after himself.
Yeah. In the previous parts, we delved into those actions that have cemented his image as a mad emperor. But as we hinted at, there might be another side to this story.
Exactly. Dr. Emery, our Roman history expert, suggested that we might view those seemingly outrageous actions not as signs of insanity, but as something else entirely purge. What are your thoughts on that?
It's certainly a thought-provoking perspective. Dr. Emery argued that instead of seeing these actions as pure madness, we could interpret them as clumsy attempts at personal branding and connecting with the Roman people.
Personal branding. That's an interesting concept to apply to a Roman emperor. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, think about it. Commodus had essentially been sidelined for much of his reign, overshadowed by powerful advisors. He may have felt a need to assert himself, to create his own distinct image separate from his father's legacy.
So he's trying to break free from the mold to establish his own identity as emperor. And he chooses Hercules, the ultimate symbol of strength and heroism, as his model.
Precisely. By associating himself with Hercules, Commodus was projecting an image of power, divine authority, and even a connection to the people. Remember, Hercules was not just a distant god, he was a demigod, someone who bridged the gap between the divine and the human.
That makes sense. It's a way of saying, I'm not just an emperor, I'm a protector, a savior, someone who embodies the strength and courage of a god.
Exactly. And this wasn't entirely unprecedented. Other emperors, like the Severans, would later adopt similar tactics, aligning themselves with popular deities to strengthen their image and connect with the people.
Okay, so the Hercules obsession might have been a calculated move, a way of shaping public perception. But what about the gladiatorial games? Surely fighting in the arena was just pure self-indulgence, right?
Not necessarily. We have to remember that gladiatorial combat was incredibly popular with the masses in ancient Rome. By participating in the games, Commodus was engaging directly with the people, playing the role of a man of the people, someone who wasn't afraid to step into the arena and face danger.
It's almost like a modern-day politician participating in a local sporting event, showing that they're not afraid to get their hands dirty, so to speak. Of course, the stakes were a bit higher in ancient Rome.
Absolutely. And there might have been another layer to this. Remember, Commodus had faced conspiracies from the elite. He may have seen the games as a way to cultivate popularity with the common people, and the army perhaps as a counterbalance to the scheming senators.
Ah, so he's building a power base outside of the traditional elite circles. He's appealing to the masses, showing them that he's one of them, that he understands their interests. That's a clever strategy, even if it seems a bit unorthodox.
Indeed. It highlights the complexities of power dynamics in ancient Rome. It wasn't simply a matter of the emperor ruling from on high. There was a constant interplay between the emperor, the senate, the army, and the people.
All right, so we've reframed the Hercules obsession and the gladiator emperor persona. But what about the renaming of Rome? That's a tough one to spin, isn't it?
It's definitely the most challenging to reinterpret, but Dr. Imre suggested that we could view it as Commodus's attempt to establish a new era, a fresh start for Rome with himself as the central figure.
So it's not just about vanity, about seeing his name plastered everywhere. It's about creating a new narrative for Rome with himself as the founder of a new era.
Exactly. It's a bold and perhaps misguided attempt to reshape history and insert himself into the very fabric of Roman identity.
It does make you wonder what might have happened if he had succeeded in this plan. Would we be talking about Colonia Commodiana today? It's a fascinating thought experiment.
Indeed. But as we know, history took a different turn. Commodus's reign and his life were cut short by assassination.
Yes, on New Year's Eve, 192 AD, he was killed by those closest to him. What do we know about the circumstances of his death?
The sources name the Praetorian prefect Latus, a concubine named Marcia, and a chamberlain named Eclectus as the main conspirators.
So they planned this assassination together. What were their motives?
According to one account, they feared for their own lives. Commodus was reportedly becoming increasingly paranoid and unpredictable. However, Dr. Imre believes there was more to it than that. He suspects the conspiracy was planned well in advance and possibly involved other figures in the court, perhaps even Pertinax, who would become the next emperor.
So it was a calculated move to remove Commodus from power and install someone more palatable to the Senate and the elite.
That seems to be the most likely scenario. And their efforts to erase Commodus's memory through damnatio memoria, the official condemnation of his name and image, suggests that they wanted to completely discredit him and his reign.
Damnatio memoria. That's where they would remove a person's name from inscriptions and monuments, trying to erase them from history. But as we know, those efforts rarely succeed.
You're absolutely right. And Commodus's story takes another interesting turn after his death. Remember, he was the first emperor in a while to be born to the purple, breaking the tradition of adoptive emperors.
Right. His reign marked a shift towards the dynastic system of succession.
And when Septimius Severus, the founder of a new dynasty, came to power, he saw an opportunity in Commodus's legacy. He strategically rehabilitated Commodus's image to bolster his own claim to the throne.
So he used Commodus, a figure who had been condemned and erased from history, to legitimize his own rule. How did he do that?
Severus declared himself the son of Marcus Aurelius and the brother of Commodus, essentially adopting himself into the Antonine dynasty.
Wow, that's quite a historical rewrite. So the condemned emperor is now being embraced as part of the imperial family tree. It really shows how history is often written by the victors.
It certainly does. Commodus's story is a perfect example of how perceptions of historical figures can shift and evolve over time, depending on who's telling the story and what their agenda might be.
It's a reminder that we should always be critical of the narratives we encounter and to consider multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. History is not a static collection of facts. It's a dynamic and ever-evolving tapestry of interpretations and perspectives.
Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough job of unraveling the complexities of Commodus's life and legacy. We've explored the traditional narrative of the Mad Emperor, but we've also delved into alternative interpretations, considering the political dynamics, the social context, and the power struggles that shaped his reign.
And in the end, it's up to each individual to decide how they interpret the evidence and what conclusions they draw about Commodus. Was he a tyrant, a victim of circumstance, a shrewd political operator, or perhaps a combination of all these things?
That's the beauty of history. There's rarely a simple answer. It's a journey of exploration, of questioning, of piecing together fragments of the past to create a fuller, more nuanced understanding of the world and the people who came before us.
And I think that's a fitting note to end on.
Yes, I think so too. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Commodus. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more explorations of history's most fascinating and controversial figures. Until next time.